I trusted her like a second mother. She smiled while she took everything my parents left me. When I first met Lorna Merrick, I thought she was the kind of woman who could make anyone feel at home. She hugged me tight, called me sweetheart, and said she'd always wanted a daughter. After losing my parents a few years earlier, that warmth meant more than I could ever explain. I didn't come from money, but I had something they left behind for me, a trust fund that was supposed to give me security for the rest of my life. $750,000 that my father worked his whole life for. When I married Evan, I thought I was marrying someone kind, someone who'd understand me. He was charming, steady, and came from a well-off family in Massachusetts. His mother adored him and at first seemed to adore me too. She hosted Sunday dinners with perfect table settings and cooked enough food for a small army. She'd send me home with leftovers and say things like, "You're family now, Celia. No need to thank me." But over time, her kindness began to shift into something else. Little comments slipped out in conversation, things that felt harmless at first. Evan's never been comfortable when women talk about money. Or, "Men like to feel they're taking care of their wives, dear. It's important for their pride." I tried to laugh it off, but those words stuck. When I mentioned wanting to use part of my trust fund for a down payment on a house, Lorna's face tightened in concern. "Oh, darling," she said, placing her manicured hand on mine. "You don't want to start your marriage with that kind of imbalance. Let Evan handle the finances. You can keep your trust, but why not have me help you manage it? My accountant is excellent, and he's already familiar with our family's investments." She made it sound so logical, so kind. I didn't want to seem ungrateful or defensive. She promised it would still be mine, just organized differently. Evan agreed it was a smart idea. "Mom's great with this stuff," he said. "She helped me set up my accounts when I was younger." I hesitated, but everyone around me seemed calm, certain. Lorna even took me to lunch the day we met her lawyer, talking about family, recipes, and plans for the future. It felt like a mother-daughter moment I'd always missed. I remember the smell of her perfume as she leaned close, pointing to where I needed to sign. "This just lets my accountant manage things for you," she said softly. "Nothing changes, you'll just have better returns." I signed without reading every page. I didn't want to insult her by questioning her intentions. She smiled, that perfect smile she always wore when she got her way. I didn't know then that the moment my pen touched the paper, I had handed her everything my parents had worked for. The trust fund, the security, the piece of them I still had left. And she knew exactly what she was doing. For a while, everything felt peaceful. I believed I had married into a family that truly cared about me. Lorna called almost every day, asking if I needed anything, reminding me to take care of her son. She always sounded so genuine that I started to feel lucky to have her. When she offered to keep handling our finances to relieve stress on Evan, I agreed without much thought. It sounded harmless, helpful even. Evan was working long hours at the firm and came home exhausted most nights. He'd kiss my forehead, mumble a few words about work, and fall asleep on the couch. Whenever I tried to bring up the accounts or bills, he would say, "Mom's got it covered, Celia. Don't worry." I didn't want to add more pressure to his life, so I stayed quiet. Soon, little changes began to appear. Lorna started giving her opinions about our home. What colors suited the living room, which furniture looked more appropriate for our social circle, how I should host guests. When I picked out curtains I liked, she wrinkled her nose. "They make the room look small, dear," she said, then sent over new ones without asking. At first, I told myself it was just her way of being involved. But it didn't stop there. She'd comment on how I shopped for groceries, what brands I used, even how much I spent on small things like candles or plants. Every suggestion came wrapped in kindness, but I started feeling like a guest in my own home. One afternoon, I sat down with the new financial statements that came in the mail. I noticed the accounts were under a different name, something called Merrick Family Holdings. I didn't understand why my trust fund was part of that. My name wasn't even listed the same way anymore. My stomach twisted. When I called Lorna to ask, she laughed lightly, as if I had said something silly. "Oh, Celia," she said, "you really don't need to worry about all that legal jargon. Everything is still yours. We just restructured things so it's more efficient. You're family now, dear. Family doesn't keep secrets." The way she said it made me feel small, like a child being scolded for asking too many questions. I wanted to trust her, but something inside me felt off. Still, I thanked her, apologized for doubting, and hung up. That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers again. Evan was asleep, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I wanted to tell him I was worried, but he had been so tired lately, so distant. I didn't want to seem ungrateful or paranoid. So I folded the papers neatly and put them back in the drawer. I told myself Lorna was just trying to help. I told myself everything was fine. But deep down, I already knew something was changing, and not in my favor. Months went by, and life settled into a strange rhythm. Lorna was still handling all our finances, and I tried not to think too much about it. But one morning, while sorting through the mail, I noticed something odd. The monthly statements for the trust account hadn't come in for a while. When I asked about it, Lorna smiled and said, "Oh, sweetheart, I had them redirected to my office for tax reasons. It's easier that way since everything's under our family's umbrella now." Something about her tone made my stomach tighten. I tried to sound calm when I asked, "But shouldn't I at least get a copy?" She chuckled softly. "Celia, you're overthinking this. You're young. Let me handle the boring parts. Trust me, it's all for your benefit." I didn't argue, but later that week, while cleaning out some old files, I found an older statement tucked inside one of our drawers. Comparing it to a recent document Lorna had shown me briefly, I noticed new withdrawals and expenses I didn't recognize. Thousands spent on something called Merrick Garden renovation and another labeled Family Travel Florida. I hadn't approved any of it. I waited until Sunday dinner to bring it up, my heart pounding the whole time. After dessert, when Evan went to put dishes away, I looked at Lorna and said, "I found some charges that don't seem right. The landscaping, the trip, were those paid with my trust?" She didn't even flinch. Instead, she gave me that patient, almost pitying smile she always used when she wanted me to feel small. "Celia, darling, you make it sound so serious. Those were family expenses. You benefit from the estate too, don't you? It's all shared." "I didn't agree to share my trust fund," I said quietly. Her expression hardened for just a second before she sighed and reached for my hand. "Do you really think I'd ever steal from my own daughter-in-law? From Evan's wife? After everything I've done to help you?" Her voice trembled slightly, just enough to sound hurt. I thought we were past this kind of suspicion. Evan walked back into the room right then, and Lorna's eyes filled with tears on cue. "She thinks I've been dishonest with her," she said softly, turning toward him. Evan frowned at me, confused. "Celia, Mom's just helping us. Why are you making this into a fight?" I felt my throat tighten. "I just wanted to understand where the money's going," I said, but he was already shaking his head. Later that night, he told me I needed to stop stressing over money. "Mom knows what she's doing," he said. "You're imagining problems that aren't there." I lay awake long after he fell asleep, staring at the ceiling. My heart felt heavy, but beneath the hurt, something sharper started to grow. I knew Lorna was lying, and I knew Evan didn't want to see it. I couldn't prove it yet, but I promised myself that one day I would. I didn't say it out loud. I just made the vow quietly, there in the dark, while the woman who stole my trust slept peacefully in the next town over. The uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. Every time I thought about my parents' trust fund, I felt a knot in my chest. One morning, I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. I found the old number for my father's lawyer, Mr. Raines, the man who had helped set up the fund when I was still in college. His voice was warm when he answered, but it turned uncertain when I asked about the trust. "Celia," he said slowly, "I haven't managed that account in over a year. It was restructured and moved to a different firm, Merrick Financial." The name hit me like a punch. Lorna's firm. My voice shook. "Was I notified about that?" "I sent letters, but they were returned," he said. "I assumed you had agreed to the transfer." I thanked him and hung up, my hands trembling. When I confronted Lorna later that afternoon, she didn't even look surprised. She was in her garden trimming roses, calm as ever. "Oh, that," she said, waving her hand like it was nothing. "Yes, I moved the trust under my firm for tax optimization. You'll thank me when you see how much you've saved." "You moved it without telling me," I said, my voice breaking. "That was my parents' money. You had no right." She looked up from her roses, her face tightening. "You're being dramatic, dear. You're part of this family now. Everything I do is for all of us." Evan came outside just as my voice rose. "She transferred my trust fund into her name," I said, turning to him. "Without asking me." He looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom wouldn't do anything wrong," he said. "Celia, you're starting to sound paranoid." "Paranoid?" The word stung more than I expected. "You don't even want to look at the documents?" Lorna's voice softened. "Sweetheart, she's under stress. The poor thing has been so emotional lately. Evan sighed, rubbed his temples, and muttered, "Maybe you just need a break." That was the moment something broke inside me. I packed a small bag that night. I told Evan I needed a few days at the cabin my parents used to own, just to clear my head. He didn't stop me. He barely looked at me as I left. When I came back 3 days later, her car was in the driveway. Inside, her perfume filled the air. Her bags were by the stairs, and her coat hung next to mine. She looked perfectly at home, sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea. "Oh, Celia," she said sweetly. "Evan wasn't feeling well, so I came to take care of him. You don't mind, do you?" I looked around and realized how much had changed in just a few days. My place at the table was gone. My things moved to the guest room. Evan stood beside her, quiet, avoiding my eyes. That's when I knew it wasn't just my money she'd taken. She'd taken control of everything: our marriage, our home, my sense of safety. I felt invisible in my own life. And for the first time, I started to understand that I might have to fight to get it all back. A few quiet weeks passed after that awful fight. I moved around the house like a guest, avoiding both Evan and his mother. Lorna still acted sweet whenever she spoke to me, but I could feel her watching, waiting for me to step out of line. I was exhausted from pretending everything was fine. Then one Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved, but the voice on the other end sounded tense. "Ms. Harper? My name is Thomas Weller. I work for Merrick Financial. I handle Mrs. Merrick's accounts." His tone made me sit up straight. "I probably shouldn't be calling, but I think you should know something." My heart started pounding. "What is it?" There was a pause, then he said quietly, "Your name was completely removed from the trust 6 months ago." For a second, I couldn't speak. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "That's impossible," I finally said. "There must be a mistake. I never signed anything like that." "I know," he said. His voice shook slightly. "That's why I'm calling you. I've seen the paperwork, and something isn't right. The signatures, the dates, they don't line up." I pressed a hand against the counter, trying to steady myself. "Can you show me?" He hesitated. "If I send copies, you have to promise not to mention my name. Mrs. Merrick is powerful, and I could lose my job." "I promise," I said quickly. An hour later, an email arrived with several scanned pages. My stomach turned as I opened them. There it was, my name in careful, perfect handwriting, but it wasn't mine. The signature looked practiced, traced. Dates had been altered, and a clause had been added that gave Lorna full management and ownership rights over all assets related to the Harper Trust. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Every warning sign I had ignored came crashing back. All the smiles, all the gentle reassurances, all the times she told me not to worry. It had all been a lie. She hadn't just stolen from me. She had erased me. When Evan came home that evening, I didn't say a word. He asked if I was okay, and I told him I was just tired. I smiled, just like his mother always did. I made him dinner, listened to him talk about work, and nodded at all the right times. Inside, I felt something shift. The grief that had weighed me down began to cool into something sharper. Determination. If Lorna thought she had won, she was wrong. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. I would let her think she still had control, that I was the same obedient daughter-in-law she believed she had broken. But from that moment, I knew the truth. I wasn't her victim anymore. I was her biggest mistake. The next morning, I found the old number for my father's friend and lawyer, Miriam Cates. She had retired a few years ago, but I remembered how much my father trusted her. When she answered, her voice was the same, firm, warm, and direct. "Miriam, it's Celia Harper," I said quietly. "I think something's happened with my trust fund." There was a short pause, then she said, "Tell me everything." I met her at a small cafe the next day. I showed her the forged documents Thomas had sent me. She read them carefully, her brows tightening with each page. "This isn't just fraud," she said finally. "It's theft, and it's deliberate. Your mother-in-law is smarter than most criminals I've dealt with." Her words were calm but sharp. She didn't seem afraid of Lorna. She almost looked like she was enjoying the challenge. "We'll need proof," she said. "Emails, phone calls, financial transfers, anything that ties her to this." I nodded. "Thomas can help. He's scared, but he knows everything." Over the next few weeks, Thomas quietly sent documents, transaction logs, statements, and even messages from Lorna instructing him to adjust dates and signatures. Miriam gathered everything, organizing the evidence piece by piece. Meanwhile, I started acting like nothing had changed. I smiled at Lorna, thanked her for all her help, and even invited her over for dinner. She seemed pleased, as if she had finally trained me into the perfect obedient wife. Evan noticed the calm between us and relaxed. He thought things were getting better. At dinners, I listened to Lorna talk about business, about how strong leadership means taking control when others can't. She never realized that I had started recording those conversations with a small device tucked in my purse. Every word she said about managing family finances became part of the file Miriam was building. The more confident she became, the more careless she grew. She started bragging about how much money she had saved the family, even hinting that she had redirected some assets into safer accounts. Evan laughed and called her a genius. I just smiled, hiding the anger behind polite laughter. Quietly, I began reclaiming what little access I still had. A few small accounts were still in my name: insurance policies, a savings account, a few investments I had made before marriage. I changed passwords, redirected mail, and updated security questions. Lorna didn't notice. She was too busy feeling proud of herself. At night, when the house was silent, I'd sit at my desk, writing notes for Miriam, saving copies of everything Thomas sent. My fear had turned into focus. Each step felt like a move in a slow, careful game. I kept my voice gentle and my smile steady, but inside, I was counting down. I knew the storm was coming. And when it finally broke, I wanted to be ready to make sure she never saw it coming. It didn't take long for Lorna's pride to catch up with her. She had gotten too comfortable, too sure that she'd won. One afternoon, Thomas called again, his voice low but urgent. "Celia, I think you should see something," he said. He sent over a set of property documents from a recent real estate deal. My name was on them, my name, my signature, and my old trust listed as one of the funding sources. But I hadn't signed a thing. "She used your identity," Thomas said quietly. "It's not just mismanagement anymore. It's fraud. This could ruin her if it gets out." I stared at the documents for a long time, feeling that familiar mix of anger and disbelief. This time, though, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just nodded to myself. This was what we needed. I met with Miriam that night. We spread out every paper across her dining table, the evidence covering every inch of wood. She was focused, sharp as ever. "This is enough," she said finally. "We'll file civil and criminal complaints at the same time. It has to be airtight, no mistakes." Over the next week, we worked quietly. Thomas provided sworn statements. Miriam drafted every document with precision. I went through each detail, every date, every signature, making sure nothing could be questioned. By the end, the case was solid. Lorna had built her empire on forged documents and false promises, and now it was ready to crumble. Before we filed, I decided to see her one last time. I told Evan I wanted to visit his mother, to bring her some flowers as a peace offering. He seemed relieved, thinking maybe I was finally moving past the tension. He didn't know this visit had nothing to do with peace. When I arrived, she greeted me with that same polished smile, pretending to be surprised. "Celia, what a lovely surprise. You didn't have to bring these," she said, taking the bouquet. "I wanted to," I said softly, stepping inside. The house smelled of roses and expensive candles, just like always. Everything was perfect on the surface. We sat in her bright kitchen, and she started talking about family, about how proud she was that everything was finally in order. I let her talk, sipping tea and watching her carefully. Then I set my cup down and looked her in the eye. "It must feel nice," I said quietly. "Having everything just the way you wanted. The accounts, the investments, the properties. You've really built quite a legacy." She blinked, her smile tightening. "I'm not sure what you mean, dear." I leaned closer. "You should be careful with the paperwork you sign in my name. Not everyone is as trusting as I used to be." For the first time, I saw her face change. The color drained slightly, and her confident smile faltered. "Celia," she began, but I stood up. I walked to the door, turned once more, and said softly, "You taught me to trust the wrong people. I won't make that mistake again." Then I left her standing there, the flowers still in her hands, her perfect world finally starting to crack. 3 days after my visit, everything began to unfold. Early one morning, Lorna was served with legal papers, fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. Her accounts were frozen, and the court issued an order demanding she return the full value of my trust fund with penalties. The news spread quickly through the small circle she cared about most: her wealthy friends, her business partners, and her clients. For a woman like Lorna, reputation was everything. Evan came home that evening pale and shaken. He held the papers in his hand, his voice barely steady. "Mom's been charged," he said, almost to himself. "They're saying she forged your signature. That she stole from you." I watched him for a moment before answering. "They're not saying it," I replied quietly. "She did it." He sat down hard, still trying to process it. "She told me everything was legal. She said you knew." "She lied," I said simply. There was no anger in my voice anymore. Just truth. The next few weeks were a blur of hearings and paperwork. Miriam handled most of it, calm and precise, while I followed her lead. Thomas testified in court, his voice shaking as he admitted that Lorna had ordered him to falsify my documents. He told the judge that he'd been afraid to come forward sooner, afraid of losing his job. His honesty sealed the case. Lorna sat at the defense table in her expensive suit, her posture still proud but her eyes cold. When it was her turn to speak, she tried to twist the story, claiming she had acted in the best interest of the family, that I was confused and emotionally unstable. She painted herself as the victim, a caring mother-in-law misunderstood by a bitter daughter-in-law. But Miriam was ready. She presented every forged signature, every email, every transaction with my name attached. The evidence spoke louder than any lie Lorna could tell. Even the judge seemed impatient with her attempts to shift blame. When Thomas read the statement where Lorna explicitly instructed him to remove Celia's ownership references, the courtroom went silent. I watched Lorna's face carefully. Her lips tightened, her eyes flickered, but she didn't look at me once. By the end of the trial, the verdict was clear. The court ordered the full restoration of my trust fund, plus additional damages for emotional distress. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about justice, about knowing I hadn't imagined any of it. Evan tried to speak to me afterward, his voice breaking. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear I didn't know." "I believe you," I said softly. "But I can't stay with someone who never looked close enough to see the truth." As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt an odd calm settle over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. The woman who had taken everything from me was finally facing the consequences, and I was the one walking away free. A month after the court ruling, I packed my things and left the house for good. The place didn't feel like home anymore. Every corner reminded me of lies, of nights spent doubting myself, of words that had cut deeper than I'd ever admit. I found a small cottage in a quiet coastal town in Maine, a few hours away from everything I wanted to forget. The air smelled like salt and pine, and for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. I didn't tell many people where I went. I wanted silence. I spent my mornings walking along the shore and my afternoons reading on the porch. The sea was steady and calm, and so was I. For the first time since my parents died, I felt close to them again. Evan called several times before I finally agreed to meet him once. He looked tired, older somehow. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have believed you. I should have protected you." I listened quietly. His words were sincere, but they came too late. "I don't hate you, Evan," I said. "But I can't go back. There's nothing left to fix." He nodded slowly, understanding. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels like goodbye. When he left, I didn't cry. I had already done enough of that. News about Lorna spread quickly. She lost her firm, her standing, her so-called friends. The people who once praised her kept their distance now. Her assets were seized, her accounts monitored. She tried to rebuild her image, but no one trusted her anymore. I didn't need to see it to know. Her pride had finally met its end. When the settlement money arrived, I didn't celebrate. I met with Miriam one last time to thank her. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "Your father would be proud of how you handled this." Her words stayed with me long after she was gone. Not long after, I decided to donate part of the money to a legal foundation that helped victims of financial abuse. It felt right. I didn't want the money to just sit there as a reminder of what was taken. I wanted it to mean something again. Sometimes, when I walk by the ocean, I think about how much I lost and how much I've gained. Revenge wasn't what I wanted anymore. It wasn't about making her suffer. It was about taking my life back. I realized that power doesn't come from hurting someone back. It comes from standing up again after they've tried to break you. And as I watched the waves roll in, I finally felt whole again. A year passed quietly in my little cottage by the sea. The seasons changed, and life settled into a calm rhythm. I spent most of my days working remotely, tending to my small garden and walking along the shoreline at sunset. The pain that once filled every thought had faded into something softer, something almost peaceful. I rarely thought about Lorna or the Merricks anymore. It felt like another life, one I had finally closed the door on. One afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Ms. Harper," the voice said. It took me a second to recognize it. "It's Thomas Weller." I smiled a little, surprised. "Thomas, it's been a long time. How are you?" There was a pause on the other end, and then he laughed softly, a sound that carried relief. "Better," he said. "Much better. I wanted to call and thank you." "Thank me?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "When everything happened with Lorna, I realized I couldn't keep living like that, working for people who thought power meant control. Watching you stand up to her, even after everything she did, it made me think maybe I could start over too." I listened quietly as he told me he had opened his own small accounting firm in Boston. He said he was helping families rebuild after financial manipulation and fraud, cases not unlike mine. "I guess you could say your fight helped me find some courage of my own," he said. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I looked out the window at the sea, the sun reflecting off the waves. "I'm glad you did," I said finally. "You were the one who risked everything to tell me the truth. Without you, I wouldn't have had a chance." He sounded emotional when he replied. "You deserved better, Celia. I just did the right thing." After we hung up, I stood on the porch, letting the ocean breeze brush against my face. The air felt light, clean, like the past had finally loosened its grip. I thought about how strange life was, how one small act of courage from a stranger had changed everything. Lorna Merrick had spent her whole life trying to control others, believing that money and manipulation made her untouchable. But in the end, it wasn't her power that lasted. It was truth, and it was the people she had underestimated, the ones she thought she could silence. As I watched the waves roll toward the shore, I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from revenge, but from knowing I had survived her. I whispered the words to myself, letting them linger in the wind. Lorna Merrick thought she could steal my future. But in the end, her own accountant gave it back to me. And for the first time in a long time, I truly felt free.